Hey guys, Fox here, and today we're going to be ranking all 8 UFL head coaches heading into the 2025 UFL season. Yes, it is time for the yearly head coach ranking video, and we're going to be adding a little different thing. Now, in the past, I've just kind of ranked head coaches, but now I'm also going to be looking back at the last ranking to see exactly where they've moved since then. We did actually do a post 2024 season head coach ranking, so we're going to be basing it off that one. And without further ado, let's get right on into this with number 8, Curtis Johnson, the Roughnecks. This shouldn't shock anybody. Look, a lot of people are honestly shocked he's still a head coach in this league. The fact is that, well, there's a couple coaches that kind of fit into the same realm of kind of fell off a cliff in 2024 compared to 2023. Curtis Johnson was the one of those guys that actually didn't really do anything in 2023. In 2023, the Gamblers were an okay team. They finished with a decent record, but they didn't make the playoffs. Mark Thompson had an incredible year and it was pretty much for nothing. And then 2024 happened and the team just fell off a cliff. Look, the Memphis Showboats, just pure football, were the worst team in the league. Yet nobody could justify putting them at 8 in the power rankings because some way, somehow, the Roughnecks lost to them not once, but twice. Again, the Showboats finished pretty much last in like every major statistical category. Yet, it was sad. Now, the one thing that really is sad, though, about the Roughnecks is the fact that this past season, their pass rush was abysmal. Look, to talk about time and time again, the Roughnecks were supposed to have an incredible pass rush and a great receiving core. The receiving core was one guy, and the pass rush was also one guy. Look, they dealt with some injuries, right? A couple guys played really well until they got hurt, but overall, the unit finished as the worst team in actually getting to the quarterback, and that's despite the fact that they had what we expected to be the best pass rush in the entire league. Now, their offense was also pretty pitiful, all things considered. They only had about like 250 yards a game. That was near the bottom of the league. Points allowed, they weren't technically horrid, but they were bad. They were at that 200 threshold. Overall, this was a team that, like I said, finished 2-8 or 1-9. Should have been the worst team in the league, or shouldn't have been. It's weird, right? The Showboats were the worst team. The whole season, they proved it week in and week out. But the Roughnecks just couldn't beat them. So it's very weird talking about the Roughnecks because in a lot of ways, it makes them look even worse. The fact is the Showboats were the worst team in the league, yet you lost to them twice. So it makes you look even worse because, again, for how bad the Roughnecks were statistically and just how much disappointments there were, the pass rush, Isaiah Henney, a lot of other things, quarterback play, they weren't even the worst team, but finished as the worst team. You know what I mean? That's the best way to put it. They were not the worst team in the league, yet they finished as the worst team in the league, including power rankings. I'm not saying literally, I'm saying even power rankings wise. That's what happens when you can't beat a Showboats team that can't get out of its own way to do anything. Curtis Johnson is last. He was a huge reason for that. They've been fully revamping the roster. A lot of questionable decisions made on bringing back pretty much the entire coaching staff with like a very, very, very minimal change. New GM is kind of, taking control. It's going to be interesting to see what happens, but Roughnecks fans are not looking forward to this season with Curtis Johnson still at the helm. Number 7 is Ken Whisenhunt. Now, he technically moves down a spot from where John DeFilippo was. That's why it's the NA parentheses 6, because Whisenhunt wasn't the coach, obviously. The only reason I have him here is because he is a new coach. And this isn't just a new coach, this is somebody who's completely new to spring football, right? This isn't somebody who was involved in these other leagues where it's like, okay, well, they were a coach or an assistant coach in, the AAF or XFL or something. He's brand new to this. So I'm putting him at 7 because of the fact that he's inexperienced. And it's like I've talked about with players as well. Look, a player can be this highly touted prospect in the NFL. They flame out there, they go to the spring football, and they end up flaming out there again. Right? We've seen that before with players. Breland Speaks versus Robert Kimdichie. In theory, both of them should have been great for the Panthers. Only one of them ended up making the roster and was great. The other one, not as much. Now, Ken Whisenhunt as head coach had a 48-71 record. Now, a lot of that was because it kind of tanked after the Super Bowl run he had with the Cardinals. It kind of just, went down, 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 especially his time with the Titans. Now, as an offensive coordinator, he wasn't there fully in 2019, but he's there a lot of it. As an offensive coordinator, he didn't really do all that well, but he didn't do horrible. The last years when it really kind of fell off a cliff, but aside from that, it wasn't great. Again, the Anthony Lynn coach Chargers ended up being a kind of mixed bag overall. So, since then, he's been not a coordinator. He's been one of those assistant analyst type of guys. So he hasn't had a true major coaching position in a sense of like a coordinator or a head coach since that 2019 season. So those things combined make me put him at 7. Again, this is a pure preemptive placing. I'm not just going to guess and say, oh, he'll be a top 5 coach in the league just, to say it. Again, this is something that the 7 is kind of like not fully there. It's just a sort of, we don't know for sure, but the odds of him being worse than Curtis Johnson are very low. Hence why he's above him, why he is at 7. Again, he could easily, when we go back and do this rankings after the season, move up to like top 4. We'll have to wait and see. As of now, putting him at 7. Now, number 6 is going to be Reggie Barlow. I'm moving it up one spot above the Showboats and Wizenhut for really one reason. He actually did do something with the team, right? Look, when I look back at this, some of the rankings I did in my postseason, I kind of regret where I put some of these guys kind of was like too gung-ho. Barlow made a lot of mistakes this past season, but there are a couple things that are important to note. His running back did get hurt pretty much like a couple weeks before the season started. His running back was the best player on the team. Got hurt is a big deal. Now, while some of this does fall on him, the receiving core was not great, and we knew that heading into the season. Again, a couple guys ended up playing really well, like Ty Scott at the end of the year. But overall, the receiving core was a weakness. We expected that. Lost a lot of great players from 2023. And again, in 2023, with a good roster, some would say a great roster, they ended up making it to the championship game. They finished 9-1. They did lose in that championship game, but they did make it there. That's something that a lot of these other coaches can't say they did. And so he kind of feels like Jordan Ta'amu in a sense. You have to put the pieces around him to do well, but he'll at least do something, right? Look, I know some of you will say he was really bad this past season. He was. But the fact is, when you look what he did in 2023, there's a lot of coaches that if you put them on that Defenders team, they would not have gone 9-1. And by a lot of coaches, I mean about half of the coaches in that XFL. If you had put like Hines Ward as the coach of that Defenders team, they're not finishing 9-1. I'm sorry, they're not. You put Terrell Buckley as the head coach, they're not finishing 9-1. That Defenders team would have finished much worse had they not had Reggie Barlow. Now, you could argue that they had somebody else as the head coach. They may have finished 10-0, which I'm not going to disagree with that. But again, they could have done worse. So while Barlow definitely did disappoint this past season, it is important to note that they still ended up being in the playoff hunt pretty late into the season. It wasn't until like the last 3 weeks of the season where it was officially over. They stayed alive a while. They had that one huge win over the Brahmas, which kept them alive in it. But again, their defense was really pitiful. Their turnovers were bad, and a lot of that was on Ta'amu throwing a bunch of interceptions. So, kind of a mini benefit of the doubt here, putting him at 6. Again, it's still bottom 2 in regards to coaches that returned. But I do think that he deserves to go above Wizenhut because we've at least seen him have some success at this level. And so, because of that, I am putting him at 6. But losing that championship game in 2023 and this past season, 6, no higher. Number 5 is going to be Anthony Beck. This is the poster child of I kind of overreacted. Look, now that it's been a few months and looking at how things have gone, even if I still believed that at the end of the season I should have put him above Stoops, not anymore. I'm putting him at 5. Number 1 is the most important thing. Still has not been able to consistently beat good teams. Now, yes, you could say this about a lot of other coaches. You really could. But again, the Battlehawks' biggest issue in both these past 2 seasons is that when it matters, they're not getting the job done. Just take a look at the 2 seasons. So, 2023, the XFL, there were 2 teams they had to do better than. The Sea Dragons and the Defenders. Their one win was the least impressive of all of them. A Week 2 win against the Sea Dragons. Now, yes, it was at Seattle, but considering they lost at home, doesn't matter. The point is, that was the least important one. That was an early season. You still didn't know fully who was going to be great kind of game. You won it. Congrats. Then you lost to DC. Then you lost to them again. Then in Week 9, they got creamed by the Dragons. I've said it before and say it again. Battlehawks did not deserve to make the playoffs in 2023 because they lost that game. They win that game, they're in the playoffs. And then this past season, they technically didn't even get a win again when it mattered. Now you may be saying, hey, they won Week 10 against the Brahmas. That's a technicality. Okay, the Brahmas were missing both their running backs. Their quarterbacks were playing hurt. So the AJ was playing hurt argument doesn't exist because, again, so were the Brahmas. The Brahmas were injured as well, and they were more injured and still kept it close. Then the conference championship game was a blowout. The score, way closer than the game actually was, and that score isn't even that close. The Battlehawks lost the Week 7 game to Steins. And again, That's me saying that, again, the same thing. I'm not going to give him too much flack for losing in week 1. It was week 1. Not going to give him too much credit for winning in week 3. It was week 3 against the Brahmas, and we still didn't know for sure how good the Brahmas were at that point. Because before that, the Brahmas had a couple fluky wins. The point is, though, the last 3 games of both seasons that were the best teams, or if we're going to be fully fair, the last, post week 4, so week 5 and beyond, against great teams, they won 1 game, and it took the team being injured. That's their only win. Now, the other issues is the fact that A.J. McCarron's situation. The weird way they released him was really bad, and then bringing back Gradkowski. And I understand now he's, in the NFL, but he still was planning to bring back Gradkowski. If you watched Battlehawks games, you know he was not a great play caller. There were many plays that he was calling that made no sense. And it pretty much has divided the fan base into some people blaming McCarron, saying McCarron just wasn't as good as people said he was, or people like me who say Gradkowski really held the team back. And while you could blame McCarron a little bit, it's like giving him like 5% of the blame to like the 90% you give to Gradkowski, and then 5% to everybody else. Gradkowski had this insane receiving core, yet week in and week out, play after play, it was like check down, screens, super slow passes, sub 5 yards beyond the line of scrimmage type of plays for a team that had the best receiving core. So all of this combines to where I have to put Becht at 5. Now again, I'm still putting him at 5. He's still a top 5 coach in the league. It's just me putting him at 4 last year. I regret it in hindsight. I think I should have put him at 5. It still moved him up from where I had him in the preseason that year. But again, I think 5 is a deserving spot for him. He is somebody who is very liked by, or we used to say was very liked by his players. Now with the whole A.J. McCarron situation, we can't fully say that. But the point is, I still think he's better than I initially gave him credit for back in 2024, heading into the season. But he's still not as good as some people will try to make you think he is. He's a coach that right now is very much a middle-of-the-road coach. He has not had postseason success like guys ahead of him have. He hasn't had consistently making the playoffs like guys ahead of him have. He's somebody who has finished pretty much the same team year in and year out. 2 years, they both finished as the same type of team. They couldn't really get the job done against great teams. They beat out all the bad teams and ended up not really doing anything of note. So Anthony Becht at 5. Now number 4 is going to be Bob Stoops, moving him up above Becht. I gave him, and admittedly Wade Phillips, a lot of flack for losing close games. In hindsight, I think the last 5 games of the season deserve to move him up to 4, and I kind of regret not doing that at that point. Look, Bob Stoops, they lost a lot of close games early in the season, and that does fall a lot in coaching. But the last 5 weeks of the season, they were a better team than the Battlehawks. Well, technically, last 6, you count the playoff, you know what I mean? The first round of playoffs. They finished 3-2. The Battlehawks game, technicality, injured, no McCarron, blah, blah, blah. But considering Anthony Becht essentially blamed McCarron one way for the offense not being super dimensional, which is how you can read in between the lines, you can argue that they would have been better with him. You know what? I'm just random slander to Becht, okay? Point is, they still finished 3-2. I don't think if AJ was healthy, that game would have been different. I think the Renegades still would have won that Week 9 game. They beat a Defenders team that was legitimately playing to finish 500. They were out on a mission, and Arlington still got the job done. They crushed Memphis. They lost to Michigan by a last-second field goal. They lost to the Brahmas by 5. The last 5 weeks of the season, regular season, they played really well. And they still finished number 1 in a lot of categories. Despite the fact they couldn't, force any fumbles pretty much, they finished with the most interceptions in the entire league, defensively. They had the most passing yards a game, the best punt net average, best third down percentage, best turnover margin. Multiple stats that are very important. Punt net average, third down, and turnover may not be the most sexy stats. Well, turnover is. But they're stats that if you're really good at, in theory, you're a great team. And then again, he did win a championship in the XFL. I feel like just judging him, I pretty much just judged it purely on the UFL season, which was wrong to do. Stoops did win a championship in 2023. Now, it did take them, doing the trade for Luis Perez and Perez having that just insane playoff run, but they still got the job done. So Stoops, I'm putting him at 4. I think that I gave Becht too much credit and Stoops too little credit after the 2024 season. In hindsight, I should have put this as the ranking. I should have put it at 5 Becht, 4 Stoops, which I'm doing now heading into this season. We'll see how it works out, but that's what it is. Number 3 is going to Wade Phillips, and as you can guess, the top 3 is still the same if you remember that. Number 3 and 2 are very interchangeable. You can, do not take this as me saying one is clearly better than the other for 3 and 2. You can really easily interchange this, depending on what you judge is really good coaching versus having people do the work for you versus. It's insanely tight. Just note that you can easily swap these two. And I'm putting Phillips at number 3. Phillips was able to turn around the Brahmas, brought in a lot of players, decent former Roughnecks, decent former Guardians and all that with Cody Latimer and all that. Was able to take the team to the championship game. Now, again, they did get shut out, and I understand it was technically close in the first half. They still was a shutout 25-0. That still is a terrible box score. And yes, you still got to give him some flack for getting crushed by the Renegades in 2023 in the playoff game. So, that's the one thing that kind of hurts him there is that he's done overall, it's just postseason-wise, he may have won a game, but again, like I said before, the Battlehawks team really didn't finish the season well at all. It's hard to talk about 3 and 2 because a lot of things you can kind of put for one guy, not the other, but then put for one. It's weird. 3 and 2 are close, but I'm putting Phillips at 3. I think that overall, AJ Smith is a great offensive coordinator, and I think that the amount of say he has, he's like a Jaron Horton type of guy. He's somebody that has a ton of overall say and is one of the highest ranking coordinators. So on one hand, that's great coaching and that a head coach needs to delegate to have great coordinators. On the other hand, this feels like more of a, Phillips is just manning the defense, AJ's running the offense, whereas number 2 feels like, while it might not be the case, he feels like he has more of a say over everything. It's weird. I'm putting Phillips at 3. Number 2, I'm putting it Mike Nolan. The 2024 UFL Coach of the Year, I can just use that as the cop-out to put him over Phillips if I really wanted to. Now, again, Nolan also turned around the team. He turned around a god-awful Jeff Fisher team in 2023 to make them make the playoffs. They had to win a Week 10 game to make it into the playoffs. So they essentially won a playoff game since it was a win and in for both teams. Won that game, made it to the playoffs. They came within a terrible penalty. Not like a bad call. It was just a terrible penalty they took from making it to the championship game that year against the Stallions. And then this year, the final score was 31-18. It was insanely close. It was a very end of the first half blunder, the missed field goal, then whatever the third quarter was. That game was much closer than the score entails. Now, the Panthers ended up finishing top 4 in points allowed. They were one of the better defenses. They weren't a top-tier defense like the Brahmas were, but they also had a ton of sacks. Their 30 sacks were insane. It was second most in the league. And their yards per game was also actually really good. For a team that we expected to be just a defensive team, their yards per game was 300. It was actually a really good unit. So in terms of being a balanced team, they were one of the most well-balanced teams in the entire league. Some would say the second most balanced team in the whole league. So, got to give them credit there, and that's another kind of reason I'm putting them above San Antonio is they felt more of a cohesive unit despite injuries. Because that was another big thing, right? They had multiple quarterback injuries. Bryce Perkins was looking really good, then he got hurt early in the season. E.J. Perry got hurt. Frank Gidna ended up missing half the year. So they did deal with a lot of injuries, and now, of course, the Brahmas did as well. But overall, it's just, again, 3 and 2 is close. The cop-out reason is Mike Nolan won Coach of the Year last year. But the truth is, I think that overall, it feels like he has more overall say on the team versus the Brahmas, which is A.J. Smith and Wade Phillips kind of deal. It's tough. Look, you can easily put either one here, but that's what it is. Number 1 is Skip Holtz. Do I really need to explain why? I mean, do I really need to? If anything, he's starting to get too little credit. It's like people are trying to say that this entire team is built by Zachary Potter. It's like people don't remember the 2022 USFL season, the coaches were the GMs for every team but the Maulers, right? I mean, the coaches have had insane say on building the roster, especially from the USFL. I mean, the fact that they have won 3 championships with 3 different starting quarterbacks and 4 different quarterbacks playing in playoff games is unbelievable. They went from having the Jamar Smith and then Magoo coming in the second half with the injury in the first game to Alex Magoo winning that second championship to Matt Corral having to save that playoff game against the Panthers to Adrian Martinez winning championship game MVP. Arguably shouldn't have. I don't think he should have. Point is, they won it with him. I mean, he's the best coach in the league. It's just like the power rankings. You have to put the Stallions and Skip Holtz at number 1 until drastic things are done, right? Them losing in week 2 by 7 points should not justify moving him down at all, right? It's just like Skip Holtz. To this point, he has won 3 consecutive Spring Football League championships. I mean, that's insane. I mean, He's had like 2 separate 9-1 seasons in spring football. I mean, that's crazy. He is easily the best coach in the league. Until proven otherwise, you have to win at 1. Now, does that mean he should have won Coach of the Year last year? No, I do think as an overall coach, Nolan did better. I think that he was able to make a team that was already improve drastically. And I think that if it wasn't him, it would have been Wade Phillips. But in terms of the best coach, it is Skip Holtz. Just because you win Coach of the Year doesn't mean you're the best coach in the league. Coach of the Year is saying you did the best job for that specific season, right? The NFL this season, Kevin O'Connell winning it. A lot of people think Dan Campbell should have. No, Kevin O'Connell should have won it because nobody actually thought the Vikings were going to be even decent. Did they get crushed in the playoffs? Sure they did. They still finished with an insane record with Sam Darnold as their starting quarterback. The best coaching job was Kevin O'Connell this year. If it wasn't him, it would have been Dan Quinn. I don't think Campbell should have gotten it. I understand the defense was hurt. That's a topic for another day. Number 1 is Skip Holtz, no question, easy list. So that'll do it for this video. This has been Zom Fox. Make sure you subscribe and hit the bell. We're getting closer to 1,000 subscribers. We are doing a giveaway. Again, you need to have Instagram or Twitter to be able to claim your prize if you win it. Again, let me know down below what you think of the head coaching rankings. I know some people might be kind of, I guess combative over me putting Beck down at 5, but I think that it is kind of justified putting him there. I think that Stoops, I gave him too much flack for losing close games when he still ended up finishing the season really well. Again, I know some Brahmas fans are going to say Phillips should be at 2. Like I said, in my personal opinion, you can easily put him at like 2A and 2B, or even put him as a draw. Nolan and Phillips are definitely the second and third best coaches in the league. The bottom 3, it's just a matter of how much credit do you give a guy that hasn't actually coached in spring football. I'm not giving him a ton of credit just because he hasn't had a major role in a few years. But again, you could definitely put him at like 6, or you could put him down at 8, depending on how you do it. Again, if you've been a fan of the channel for a while, think about becoming a community member. We do at least one exclusive channel members video a week, or a month, I mean. And I have exclusive team emojis. We're up to, I believe, 6 now. We have like the Roughnecks, the Brahmas, the Battlehawks, Stallions, Panthers, and Showboats. So if we get a few more, we can get, all 8 of them, but we'll see. And as always, guys, have a great night.